All right, I'm going to show you another loop that's related to the while loop, and this one is called a do while loop, and it has the word do followed by a block of code, and it says there's a while expected. So we'll put in here, and then that's where our condition goes. So let's do our rocket countdown with a do while loop, even though we know for loops are better for it. While I is greater than or equal to 0, we need to initialize I before the loop starts, because that's what we have to do in a do while, in any kind of while loop. Int I equals 10. What happens inside our loop? That's where we print out our variable I. So what's the difference in this? I also need to count down I. What's the difference here? Let's go ahead and run this. And it still prints out 10 through 0. What's the difference? So we start I at 10. We get to the do statement, and it runs the code that's in here. Okay. That code runs the first time, no matter what. We don't ever test the condition until after the body of the loop has ran once. So in this case, it prints out 10, takes I down to 9, and then does the test. Is I greater than or equal to 0? Yes. And if it is, we come back up and do the loop again. So a do while loop, notice the while comes after the body of the loop, the do comes before the loop, means that we run the loop once, then we do our test. We still have to have the same parts. We still have to initialize a variable. In this case, we have to have something that will change the condition. In this case, we're subtracting 1 from I, so that eventually this becomes false and the loop ends. And we can print blast off here. But the condition happens afterwards. Well, what does that mean for us? In practicality, right now, it doesn't mean anything. But what if I started I -5? Now, by all rights, I is less than 0. So the condition is false from the very beginning, but it still prints -5 because it still runs through the loop one time. And sometimes, in some cases, we want the loop to run at least once for some reason. And this is the way we do that. We do the test afterwards. Since it was printed out -5 here, and now I became -6. -6 is not greater than or equal to 0. So our loop ended and we printed blast off. That's all that happened this time. So you use do while when you want to make sure the body of the loop runs at least one time. You don't use it nearly as often as you might use a while loop or a for loop. Let's talk about when you use what. So I'm going to pull this up. So a while loop is a pre-test loop. That means the first test happened before the loop ever started. It's a pre-test loop. We test it before the loop starts. And it repeats until the condition becomes false. Okay. We use that when we're not certain how many times the loop should be executed. If we don't know how many times that loop is going to run because there's something unpredictable that needs to happen inside, that's when you use a while loop. A do while loop is the same thing, but it's a post-test loop. We don't test the condition until after the loop body runs the first time. It executes the loop before testing the condition, and then it repeats until the condition becomes false. Okay. We use that when we know that the code has to be executed at least once and possibly more times depending on the condition. Do you want to play again? We really don't need to answer that the first time, right? So maybe we could start with a do statement. That might be better for that example we did earlier. Okay. And the for statement is a loop that contains an initialized counter and it increments the counter with each run through the loop, and it repeats until the condition becomes false. And we do that all in one line. We use a for loop when we need to execute a loop a specific number of times. We know how many times, or we can calculate how many times it needs to run. Or when we need to increment through a set of data. We'll see that in lessons coming up. The counter that we use in the loop can also be used as an index for accessing data one thing at a time, and we'll see that coming up as well. So those are our three kinds of loops that we're going to talk about in this series: a while loop, a do while loop, and a for while loop. You're going to use one of these two on your lesson this week, on your lab activity this week, which is like a bank ATM where user has to put in a PIN in order for it to work. And you're going to keep asking for the PIN until somebody gets it right. In the next video, I'm going to talk about ways we can get out of a loop before it's supposed to end, or how we can get a loop to skip part of its loop body if we want.